Okay, so I remembered to press the button this time, so y'all can actually see in here. We still got a couple of minutes, so to wait till everybody kind of gets in here. So. Okay, so we are live today. Sorry about that. I guess I had trying to get too much going at one time on Friday and too much on my mind. So I did repeat the lecture as part of a PowerPoint. So y'all should have that. Um, you know, read it, listen to it at your leisure. I didn't realize how huge those files are. So if we have to do more of those, they're going to come in little pieces. I won't do a whole lecture at one time because it'll be impossible to deal with. So I'll break them down into little chunks. That might be easier to deal with anyway. I know I wouldn't want to listen to a whole hour's lecture at one time. Okay, so what we got to was nativism. With all of the incoming immigrants and all of the changes and the progress, but particularly the immigration, caused a backlash. Not everybody was really happy that we had huge blocks of Irish or Germans or Swedes coming in. There were some fears of, the anti-Catholic sentiment, the popery. There were fears that these Germans who were fleeing from their failed revolution would bring their revolution with them. If you're the kind of person who has to flee a revolution, you're kind of a revolutionary person. So, and they were more learned, cultured people that, there was a fear they would get involved in politics and try to change the country. The big fear was religious. But it manifests itself in a lot of different ways. In 1834, there was a series of sermons by Lyman Beecher, who was a Congregationalist minister. He's going to get involved, and his daughter is going to get involved later in abolitionist movements that leads to a mob assault on a Catholic convent in Charleston, Massachusetts. There were armed conflicts between Protestants and Catholics in Philadelphia. And by 1837, things had actually gotten organized. You start seeing groups. The Native American Association of Washington was formed. And no, this didn't include Indians. They're still not considered part of the real group of people either. We're talking white Anglo-Saxon Protestant people who have been in the country for a couple of generations. In 1849, another one, the Order of the Star-Spangled Banner, was founded in New York. It's going to grow enough to become a third political party called the American Party. It was a fraternal organization to begin with. It was very secretive. It demanded the exclusions of immigrants and Catholics from public office. They wanted to extend naturalization from 5 to 25 years. And it actually did pretty well, not on a national level, but on local levels in getting people in office. It is also known as the Know Nothing Party because as a fraternal organization, like a lot of fraternal organizations, it was very secretive. There were lots of little rituals. And when people would ask about the party, their pat answer was to know nothing. I know nothing. So they became known as the Know Nothing Party. So not everyone was happy about these new immigrants. And it has been taught for generations and generations that America is the melting pot. It's not a melting pot. People didn't come here and immediately try to blend in. And we're going to see this again and again and again because we're going to have more waves of immigrants. We're going to have different immigrants. But even the ones that we've had so far, which are all, Irish included, white, Western, European people. If you stand an Irishman next to an Englishman until they talk, you're not going to know the difference. But when they come over, they group together. You have all the Irish living in one area. All the Swedes live in one area. All the Germans live in one area. There's nobody trying to blend. It's more like a stew than a melting pot. And like I said, as we get into other groups, it's going to be even more noticeable. Labor is another issue that comes up during this time period. The Industrial Revolution has made large groups of people laborers. And as laborers, they're going to bind together. Now, before and after the revolution, skilled workers like artisans, craftsmen, mechanics, we're talking the people who made shoes, or blacksmiths, or coppers who made pots and silverware. Those people worked within a guild system. It goes back to the medieval days. This was starting to fade, but under the guild system, what would happen is if you wanted to be a shoemaker, you would go and you would apprentice yourself to a shoemaker. And you would work for that shoemaker, learning your skill. And there would be a shoemaker's organization, which would help represent you. But there were no organizations to represent the hundreds of thousands of girls that were working the milling machines, or the yarn making machines, or the looms. And they start to try to gather together. Even in the Lowell system, the girls will go on strike for better pay. It's just natural. Early unions faced legal obstacles. They were tried as unlawful conspiracies, so kind of as monopolies. But finally, in 1842, the Massachusetts Supreme Court ruled that forming a trade union was not illegal. nor was a demand that employers only hire members of that union. And it also declared that workers could strike if an employer hired non-union workers. That was a big step. That's a big step in legitimizing unions as a bargaining chip for groups. But they're still in their infancy. Usually, up until like the 20s, trade unions were local. You would have one city, one craft, like you would have the weavers union. But it would only be the weavers in Boston, which would actually be probably a bigger group. They start growing through the 20s and 30s to a larger scale. In 1834, the National Trade Union set up a system to federate city societies. So we'll take all of the weavers' looms in all of the cities and we'll gather them together to be a trade union. And they started doing that. You started seeing national craft unions of shoemakers, printers, carpenters, hand loom weavers. And just as they're getting started, that 1837 panic hits and ends most of their efforts. Pretty much everything in business stops with that panic. They're going to revive a little bit. I went too far. In the 40s, but they're not going to get a good showing until more after the 1850s. And then they're really going to get going towards the end of the 1900s. But that's in the next class. Some of the labor unions tried to get involved in politics. My notes are all messed up. So, not sure what this is. They argued for the removal of property vote qualifications for voting. You're going to see a third-party movement of labor unions, but like all other third parties, it's very focused on one issue, in this case, labor relations. Like the Anti-Masonic League was anti-Masonic. And the American Party is nativism. The Working Man's Party develops in Philadelphia in 1828. They have demands. They want free public education. They want abolition of debtors' prisons. They want a 10-hour workday. They want mechanics lien laws, limits on militia service, restrictions on prison labor. They take a hard money stat. And they're going to get some of what they want, but not in the way they think they're going to. Most of the major parties co-opt their platform because they make sense, particularly to the Democrats who are leaning on the massive Irish workers for votes. If the Irish workers want education for their children, because even in 1820s, people see education as a way up and a way out, maybe we should do something about that. Maybe that sounds good as part of our platform. 10-hour workdays. There were no limits on workdays. And it was not uncommon for people to work 12 and 16-hour workdays 6 days a week. In 1836, Jackson actually co-opts this to end a shipyard strike at a naval shipyard by offering the workers 10-hour workdays. It's still a 60-hour week because you're still working 6 days a week, but it's better than 16 hours a day for 6 days a week. Jackson establishes the 10-hour workday at the shipyard. When Van Buren becomes president, he extends that to all government offices and government projects. So civilian contractors who were working for the government also had to offer that to their workers. But workers are starting to make demands and people are starting to have to listen. It's going to take a while before we get too terribly far into it, but it's getting there. With new towns, new industries, you're also going to see a rise of professions in the United States. Towns need services. You need retail stores. You need printing offices. You need a post office, newspapers, schools, banks, doctors, lawyers. There is much more of a demand as the cities get bigger. And there are people who are willing to step up and get that specialized knowledge and skill to call themselves professionals. You also have professionals immigrating in from other places. And this is the epitome of the democratic ideal. You know, to work your way up to a professional level. Professional jobs come with a certain kind of innate level of respect. They bring with them better pay. They are seen as the reward of hard work, ambition, and merit. Now, there were not a lot of qualifications at this point. The rise of professions is just really starting. But there have been rapid expansions in colleges, in the national market economy with the industrialization, and the growing sophistication of life and society that are demanding these. We talked about all the scientific things with the electricity. We're going to see the telegraph operators. That's going to be a professional skill. Not everybody can be a telegraph operator. You have to learn something. You have to know Morse code. You have to know the mechanics of how to send them and receive the messages. And all of these were starting to grow. Teaching was the fastest growing vocation. And for most, it was seen as an entry-level job. To begin with, men were preferred. Usually 17 to 18-year-old men were school teachers. It still was a low-paying job, but it was a good first job to offer independence and stature. Just being the teacher commanded some respect, and you weren't working in a factory. And it was a stepping stone to other jobs. Most lawyers, engineers, and doctors started out as teachers. Teaching will embrace women, but men were preferred. And most professions use something of an apprentice system for training. There's not a school for doctors yet. There's not a school for lawyers yet. There's no formal board that oversees licensing yet. So you could be a lawyer by saying you were a lawyer if you knew a little bit about law. But most people would start as a clerk for a lawyer who was established to get some training. They would work for that lawyer for a number of years before they were comfortable, would be comfortable or considered to be able to, there should be standards, not standards, be considered a lawyer of your own right. Medicine was much the same. You just simply went to work for a doctor. And there's such a proliferation of doctors at this point in time that the industry actually loses stature. There's a lot of quacks out there. And most people, you went to a hospital to die. You didn't go to the hospital to get healed. That was kind of like a last step measure. But, it's still in its infancy. Doctors have been around for years. There have always been healers. There have always been doctors. But medicine is starting to take more of a scientific bent and grow. We still don't know about germs. So it's kind of a scary situation. Engineering becomes the big profession in the United States, particularly with all the building that is going on. And this is going to be your largest group of professionals. And there was a school for this, West Point. The military was training engineers. And the government would loan some of those engineers out to the railroad companies, to the canal companies. But people, if you're going to build a factory, you need an engineer who can figure out, okay, yeah, the water runs under the building and it turns this big wheel. Where do we need to put everything else? That takes some specialized skills. And this group is going to be the largest profession in the nation by the Civil War. Women were starting to work outside of the home. A lot of it depended on your situation. It was still, the ideal was still that ideal of domesticity. Women were supposed to be in the home, taking care of the children and the husband and the home. But that's not possible if you're poor. If you're an immigrant family, everybody's going to work. And then you're still going to have to take care of the house and the children and the home. But you're starting to see, with this rise of professionals, you're also starting to see a middle class emerging. People that are not filthy rich, but they're rich enough that the husband can maintain an income level that allows women to stay home. And those women are going to be very influential in this first half of the 1800s because they're going to get involved in benevolent societies. They're going to have time on their hands. Well, idle hands are the devil's workshop. So you get involved in things. You get involved in women's rights. You get involved in abolition. You get involved in temperance. They become the backbone of the volunteer force. But women who did have to work worked as servants. They worked in the factories. There were some professional opportunities in nursing and teaching. Usually, if you were teaching either at a primary school or you were teaching girls. Nursing also offers there are some opportunities there, but there's some stigma with that as well because, a proper young lady isn't supposed to see any part of a man. Even a man without a shirt is, oh no. And that's not really going to take off until after the Civil War, when they show that they can handle it during the Civil War. Before the war, most nurses were still men. After the war, you're going to see a big shift. Okay, end of this section. This is still the Jacksonian era. And this rags to riches idea gets very ingrained. It becomes a durable myth. It's not the case for most people. Most people will stay, if you were common to begin with, you're going to stay common. But the opportunity is there. And there is a growing divide between the rich and the poor. In 1828, the top 1% of New York families held 40% of the wealth. So, and the top 4% held 76% of the wealth. So out of a group of 100 people, if you have $100, say, because I can deal with these numbers, I'm making this up. Your pool of wealth is $100. 4 people out of that group of 100 control $76. That means 96 people get to split the remaining $24. That's a big gap between the wealthy. So 4 into 76. So if you're one of the lucky 4, you have $18 apiece. So 24. Okay, I said I could do that. I need a calculator because I'm not that great at math. $24 divided by 96 people. You have a quarter apiece. That's a big wage gap. But life in America was still better than life in most other industrialized nations. It's an age of growing economic opportunity, but it's also an age of growing economic and social inequity. And by the end of this time period, most of the claims are going to be staked out. You know, that the idea that job and land are always going to be available in America is starting to play out because the jobs are being filled and the land is being bought. But like I said, they're still better off than in most places in Europe. Okay, so that is the end of that slide, or that set of slides. We're going to switch over and start lesson 10. It's easier to deal, sometimes it's easier to deal chronologically, but you can't always get everything in. So we're still going to be plowing the same ground. We're still talking about this same time period, the basically 1790 to 1840, 1800 to 1850, that time period. But now we've talked about it. We've talked about it politically. We've talked about it with industry. Let's talk about it in the way people were thinking. Because there's a lot that goes on during this time period. There's a lot of changes. And in the United States and elsewhere in the world, there are some seriously deep theological, intellectual, and emotional changes going out there. Coming out of the Revolution, Americans held this idea, and part of this comes from the First Great Awakening, that we were the shining example to the world. We have this special mission, and we're better than everybody else. everybody should want to be like we are. And it's not just political, it's emotional, it's religious. Europeans had business long before we did, as far as the Industrial Revolution. And England managed to hold on to the secrets for quite a while. But we still feel like America has this mission. It's not defined as manifest destiny yet, but that idea is kind of there. And this idea has infused our national character with this element of perfectionism, and then this other element of impatience when things don't go exactly the way they're supposed to, when things don't work out the way we think that they are going to. But religious fever or fervor and the social idealism that goes along with them are going to bring major reforms and advances in human rights, along with disappointments, cynicism, and alienation when we don't achieve those goals of, say, temperance or abolition quite as quickly as we think we should. Now, the beginning movement of this was rational religion. And a lot of this comes out of that revolutionary thought of Locke. It is a direct product of the Enlightenment. This idea that if you go back to the Enlightenment thinkers believed that reason would cure everything. Reason was going to unlock the secrets of the universe. And that as long as we could think it through, we could figure it all out. Deism becomes a major religion in the aftermath of the revolution. Men like Benjamin Franklin embrace it, Thomas Jefferson. I think we've talked about it once before. They stress the Enlightenment theory of humankind's inherent goodness rather than that classic Calvinist idea of human sin. So people are basically good. There is the promise of individual perfectibility, and there is the promise of social progress. Most cities had deistical societies, which tended to attract the young. College students were very much drawn to this idea. And now if you remember back, deism doesn't throw God out. They reject the literal interpretation of the Bible. They're skeptical of miracles. They're skeptical of the divinity of Jesus. But they don't throw out the whole idea of a great central power. But they kind of take that idea of God and say, okay, God was this really great clockmaker. And he made this earth. And he wound it up and started it running and stepped back to watch. God wasn't part of God was the creator, but not really part of the process. Deists will defend free speech. They oppose religious coercion. So basically, they believe everybody can believe what they want. It's not right to try to make somebody else believe what you want to believe. Along these same lines, you'll have two other religions, Unitarianism and Universalism. Unitarianism was the American Protestant take on the Enlightenment. They're not quite as willing to go all the way as to say God's not part of our lives, but they like this idea that, the inherent goodness of man versus the inherent depravity of man. People want to believe that you can be good. And Boston's Puritan churches were the most vulnerable. And part of that is the success of Boston. It's hard to say that God is a harsh, fire and brimstone type of a God when your city is flourishing. People are making money hand over fist. Maybe God likes us. Maybe we're not sinners in the hands of an angry God. Maybe God is rewarding us. And by 1800, many New Englanders were embracing this new religion called Unitarianism that believes and emphasizes the oneness and benevolence of a loving God, the inherent goodness of humankind, and reason and conscience over creeds and confessions. So basically, God is good, God is loving, and as long as you behave in a reasonable manner, God will reward you. They believe that Jesus was saintly, but not divine. They believe that all people were capable of great goodness and all were eligible for salvation. Now that's a biggie, because our Puritan forefathers didn't believe that. Puritans believed in a pure version of predestination, where God's got a big book, and God writes down in this book everybody who's been saved. Long before they've ever been conceived and born, your name is written down either in the good list or the bad list, and there's no way to switch your name from one to the other. Not everybody was saved. This is a big jump from that. Under the Puritan system, there's no way to make yourself eligible for salvation. You either are or you aren't. Unitarians are saying, if you're good enough, you will be. You can be saved. The other, universalism. So Unitarianism is sort of an intellectual upper crust type Bostonian group. Universalism appeals to working class people. It's founded by an ex-Methodist clergyman, John Murray, in 1790, and it stresses the salvation of all people. Other than that, it pretty much believes the same thing that Unitarians do. God is good. God is benevolent. God loves us. If God didn't love us, we wouldn't have all this goodness surrounding us. And one historian kind of summed it all up. Universalists holding that God was too good to damn man, and Unitarians insisting that man was too good to be damned. And all of this comes out of this rational thought from the Enlightenment. But there's going to be a backlash, because there's always a backlash when you start messing with new ideas. In the post-revolution era, established denominations were giving way to newer, more democratic denominations. Anglicans obviously can't be Anglicans anymore. That's the Church of England. And after the Revolution, we're not part of England. So they changed their name to Episcopalians, but they still lost membership due to the fact that they had been Anglicans before. It's kind of guilt by association. You're still associated with England. Methodism, the Methodists are going to come out of the Anglican Church. They're going to actually split in 1784. It's going to be one of these new, more democratic sects, along with deists, Unitarians, Universalists. But the Methodists, they're big on evangelism. They're big on converting people. And they want to convert everybody. They're the most democratic of all the groups. They go after men, they go after women, they go after Indians, they go after African Americans, slave or free, it didn't matter. The founder is John Wesley, and he turns from Calvinism to cheerful activism. Again, we're leaving behind this idea that God picks who's saved, and now humans can pick who's being saved. If you do enough good works, you're going to get into heaven. They got rid of the prayer book. They sang lots of hymns. They welcomed the working poor classes. And they stressed this possibility of Christian perfection on earth. There's kind of a theme, as you can see, in getting rid of that old Puritan idea and going to a more benevolent God. Congregational and Anglican churches, the Baptists are going to come out of the congregational churches. And you're starting to see more and more of these different sects. And the Baptists are very democratic. At least the Methodists have an overarching, like there's a Methodist governing body. Baptists don't do that. You're not going to get the Southern Baptist Convention for many years. The first Baptist churches were all independent. So Annalise could have a Baptist church, and Elizabeth could have a Baptist church, and they would have nothing to do with each other. Because her church takes care of her congregation, and her church takes care of her congregation, and they believe what they want to believe, and they believe what they want to believe. Now, the basic beliefs are the same. But Elizabeth can't say Annalise is doing it wrong because their churches are independent. But, like I was saying, there's going to be a backlash. I'm just trying to figure out who it was. The old established churches, the congregational churches, the Episcopalians, not so much the Presbyterians or the Methodists, because they're in this new group, but the original groups are starting to fear this secularism that is coming out of the Enlightenment. And you're going to get a second Great Awakening. Timothy Dwight, who is the grandson of Jonathan Edwards, if you remember back to the first Great Awakening, he was one of the biggies, kind of starts this. He is an early activist, revivalist leader, and he is actually from Yale. He's the president of Yale, and he's looking around at the students and thinking, you've all lost your way. Yeah, a nice benevolent God is good, but you're losing your focus. And what religious leaders were seeing were people were making excuses for drifting away in this wave of prosperity that had followed after the revolution and in these early years. And they start to have revivals, camp meetings, churches start actively trying to increase their membership. And they're successful. Americans were joining Protestant churches by the thousands. They increased sixfold between 1800 and 1860. The centers of activity were in the New England colleges, primarily to begin with, and in the backwoods of Kentucky and Tennessee, Pennsylvania backwoods, along that frontier line where you didn't have a lot of established churches. Now, the Second Great Awakening is going to be marked by the, and they do keep some of the Enlightenment ideas. You know, salvation is available to everyone, not just a select few. But on the frontier, you'll see a very different take than the first time around. Circuit riding preachers become a major part of this new revival that's going to sweep the country. It's very dramatic. It's very emotional, particularly in the backwoods where people are spread out. You're lonely. You've got a farm and you're probably 3 miles from the nearest person. The circus is coming to town, except it's not a circus. It's a church meeting and everybody's welcome. They would have huge camp meetings where people would actually go and camp. You might be there for 2 weeks. They cut across social, economic, political, racial lines. A lot of them were multi-religion. There's non-denominational. That's the word I'm trying to come up with. Where you might have Methodists, Baptists, and Presbyterians all running one camp meeting. And people could just kind of pick and choose what they wanted. Women start playing a larger role in these, as women have always kind of been noted to be more emotional and more in tune to these religious movements. They again will play a big role. The Presbyterians are kind of entrenched in the Scotch-Irish group from Pennsylvania to Georgia. They start working with Congregationalists and actually form a written plan in 1801, the Plan of Union, which allowed Congregational and Presbyterian churches to merge. They called it Presbyterian, where you would have one church that could call a minister from either denomination. The Baptists will appeal to the rural people. They're the only ones, though, that stick with the old idea of human depravity and a literal interpretation of the Bible. But they replace predestination with free will and universal redemption, adult baptism, and they put all on an equal basis before God. There's no difference in the Baptist church. The camp meetings, let's go back. The Methodists, kind of talked about them already, salvation by free will. They're the ones that start the circuit riders. And by the 1840s is the largest denomination behind the, 1860s, the Catholics would pass them. They attract, hang on, sorry. African Americans, they will have the break off of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. But they all kind of follow this same theory. Camp meetings held in the late summer, early fall, to thousands of people. I think I need to switch slides. They become a social outlet for isolated rural folks. And they're going to even take on a life beyond that in the American Bible Society and the American Sunday School Union, which I think are both still around today, that are formed to continue to allow people to learn and participate in Bible study. Okay, I guess we're going to stop here with Charles Finney in the Burned Over District, and we'll do them in the Mormons on Wednesday. If I find out I am not going to be here Wednesday morning, I will let you know. Our options are probably not going to include online lectures in the format that we tried when I was quarantining because we thought my daughter had COVID, but more in this format of what I sent you yesterday. I'll just go through the PowerPoint and add some narration, and y'all can listen to it. Also, remember you have your books. You can read about what we're studying, but I'll let you know if I can be here. I am going to be here. It's so much easier just to do this in person than it is to try to piecemeal it together. So, okay, we're done for today. Hey, get me out of this.